A war of words has erupted between one of Nigeria's most powerful politicians and one of its most respected Catholic leaders. But what exactly happened? Why did Nyesom Wike accuse Cardinal John Onaiyekan of taking political sides? And what does this reveal about the growing debate over President Tinubu's administration? Stay with us, because the full story is more complex than the headlines suggest. Here is what makes this different from an ordinary political quarrel. Within 48 hours, a former Rivers State governor was defending the cardinal against the current minister who succeeded him in that same political space. A northern youth group and a middle belt organization both took the cardinal's side, and a man in mourning suspended the traditional rights for his late mother to go on live television and respond. So who said what? And does the accusation actually hold up? Let us go through it carefully. If you are new to the Policy Pulse HQ, welcome. We follow the money, verify the facts, and hold power accountable. Subscribe now and join thousands of Nigerians who want more than headlines. Watch the full investigation on this channel, because this short only tells half the story. The three figures at the center. Before we go into what was said, let us be clear about who is speaking. Because in Nigeria, the position of the speaker often shapes how the words land. Nyesom Wike is the Minister of the Federal Capital Territory. He was governor of Rivers State for 8 years, and he is one of the most consequential political operators of the past decade, known for speaking bluntly and rarely retreating from a confrontation. He holds his position in President Tinubu's cabinet. Cardinal John Onaiyekan is the Archbishop Emeritus of the Catholic Archdiocese of Abuja. He is 82 years old and has spent decades as one of the most recognizable moral voices in Nigerian public life, on interfaith relations, on poverty, and on governance across several administrations. He is not a serving archbishop, which matters, and we will come back to why. Now, why is this attracting the attention it is? Partly because of who is involved, but mostly because of timing. Nigeria goes to the polls in the 2027 general elections, and every institutional relationship in this country is currently being tested for which way it will lean. When a cabinet minister questions the impartiality of a cardinal, that is not just a disagreement, it is a marker being laid down. The distinction that everybody is missing. This is the most important section of this video, so stay with me. There are two separate things being confused constantly in this story, and once you separate them, the whole argument looks different. The first is a collective statement by an institution. On Tuesday, July the 28th, a delegation of 19 leaders of the Catholic Bishops' Conference of Nigeria, led by its president, Most Reverend Matthew Man-Oso Ndagoso, Archbishop of Kaduna, visited President Tinubu at the State House in Abuja. They presented a written address. In it, the bishops raised the hardship imposed by economic reforms, with families struggling against rising food prices, transport costs, and unemployment. They raised continuing insecurity. They raised the quality of tertiary education and limited university spaces. They raised concern about the narrowing of political space and public cynicism toward the electoral process, and warned of serious consequences if the 2027 elections were not credible. And they asked for equal protection for worshippers across the Federation, citing the Supreme Court judgment of February the 10th, 2026, which affirmed the religious freedom of Muslim students at Rivers State University, and asking that the same standard protect Christians in northern Nigeria. That was the conference speaking as a body. President Tinubu responded, defending his record, saying his reforms had stabilized the country and delivered the economy from bankruptcy, that ASUU is not on strike, and that INEC remains neutral. Now, the second thing. On Friday, Cardinal Onaiyekan appeared on Primetime, a program on Arise television, and described the meeting. He said the statement read by the conference president had not been put together at random, that it was carefully considered and drawn from wide consultation, and that it represented the collective position of the conference rather than any one man's opinion. He said the bishops had told the president that the country is struggling and that the economy is taking a toll on citizens. Then he offered his personal reading of the room. He said he was not surprised that the president did not look happy, and that what worried the bishops was that many people around the president give him a rosy picture of the country that does not match reality. Two different things are being attacked. Here is where this story turns, and almost nobody has spelt it out. The document was collective, institutional, and unsigned by any one man. The television interview was individual, so when the criticism came, notice carefully what it was aimed at. It was not aimed at the conference's written assessment of the economy, security, and democracy, which came from 19 bishops and, by the cardinal's account, wide consultation across the entire conference. It was aimed at one 82-year-old man who went on television and described it. And notice a second thing. Cardinal Onaiyekan is Archbishop Emeritus. He is retired. He did not lead that delegation and he did not write that address. So the man now standing at the center of a national argument about partisanship is the one member of the group with the least institutional authority over the document being disputed. Whether that was deliberate or simply how the news cycle fell, the effect is the same. The argument moved off the collective assessment onto a single individual, and collective assessments are much harder to dismiss than individuals are.
The media chat. On Tuesday, August the 4th, 2026, Wike held his monthly media chat in Abuja, aired live on TVC. Asked about the controversy, he did not hedge. He said, quote, "I am aware of the position of Cardinal Onaiyekan. All of us know it is not hidden. His position, who he supported, everybody knows that." End quote. The interviewer then said something that has become the most discussed moment of the entire exchange. She said she did not know whom the cardinal supported. Wike did not name anyone. Instead, he maintained that the cleric's disposition toward the government had been consistently negative and pressed the point about 2023. He said, quote, "Please do not tell me he is not partisan. Do not tell me that. You know what happened during the 2023 election. People took sides. Leaders took sides. It was very open." End quote. And he added, quote, "I would be stupid to sit here for anybody to tell me this person is impartial. No, we know ourselves in this country. We know who belongs where." End quote. Now, let us state his actual argument fairly, because underneath the sharp language, there is a coherent position and it deserves to be heard properly. Wike's case has three parts. First, he says he does not oppose criticism. In his words, while he does not oppose comments from religious leaders and elder statesmen who criticize the government, when a particular section consistently voices such criticisms, the government must proceed with caution. Second, he says criticism should be balanced. He said, quote, "You do not every time say things are bad. Nobody has heard him say one day, government has done this well." End quote. His position is that a leader should commend a government where it has performed and criticize where needed, and that unrelieved criticism invites the government to conclude the critic is simply opposed to it. Third, and this is the sharpest part, he argues that perceived partisanship destroys the usefulness of the criticism itself. In his framing, if a religious leader is perceived or seen to be taking sides, it becomes very difficult for people to see those comments as helpful. He also rejected the idea that religious leaders were neutral in 2023, insisting many openly supported political interests, and said there is nothing wrong with taking political positions provided public commentary stays balanced. One point of fairness we owe the viewer here. Wike did not name a candidate. He said the cardinal's preference is publicly known, but when directly invited to say who it was, he did not. This channel is not going to fill that gap for him, and you should be cautious about anybody who does. Cardinal Onaiyekan has not been shown to have endorsed any candidate for the 2023 election.
The presidency's line separate from Wike's. It is worth being precise here because Wike is a minister, but he was speaking at his own media chat, not issuing a government statement. The presidency's own response came separately and earlier. On Saturday, 2 presidential aides responded to the Cardinal's interview. Senior Special Advisor on Media and Publicity, Temitope Ajayi, published a piece titled Cardinal Onaiyekan's Abuse of Clerical Privilege, arguing that it was fundamentally inappropriate for the Cardinal to give a public account of a closed-door meeting and that the confidentiality of such an engagement should have been respected. Special Advisor on Policy Communication, Daniel Bwala, argued that Onaiyekan's remarks did not represent the views of all Christians. The broader presidency position was that the cleric's assessment of the economy, security, and governance represented only one perspective, was open to scrutiny and rebuttal, and that the bishops are not the sole custodians of truth about the state of the nation. Ajayi also said the president had listened, responded to each issue, and acknowledged that challenges remained, while maintaining that Nigeria had emerged from a dark tunnel. Presidential aides also suggested that some church leaders had taken partisan positions during the 2023 election. So, the presidency and Wike are running parallel arguments rather than identical ones. The presidency's emphasis is on process and on the claim that the bishop's view is one perspective among many. Wike's emphasis is on the credibility of the critic. Those are related but distinct, and it is worth keeping them apart.
Should religious leaders criticize government? Let us step back from the personalities, because underneath this quarrel sits a genuine question that Nigeria has never fully settled. In this country, religious institutions are not peripheral. The Catholic Church alone runs schools, hospitals, and parishes in nearly every state, and its clergy sit closer to ordinary hardship than most office holders do. Nigerian religious leaders have spoken on national affairs for decades across military and civilian governments alike, and the tradition of clerical intervention in public life is long established here. Amaechi made this argument directly, pointing out that the Pope speaks on global issues, including wars, and saying that religious leaders should criticize governments. He also argued that a Catholic bishop's territorial responsibility can be comparable in scope to a state governor's, noting that the bishop of the Port Harcourt diocese covers the whole of Rivers State, as does the governor. But Wike's counter-question is not unreasonable either, and dismissing it would be lazy. If a cleric's public interventions run in only one direction, at what point does moral authority become political positioning? That is a real question, and it does not have an obvious answer. So, here is a way to think about it that cuts through both sides. Ask yourself one question. If the bishop's assessment is accurate, does the identity of the person delivering it change anything? Food prices are what they are. Insecurity is what it is. Either the reforms have imposed severe hardship on families or they have not, and that is measurable independently of whether an 82-year-old cardinal voted in a particular way in 2023. Now apply the same test the other way, honestly, because it cuts both directions. If a critic really were consistently one-sided, that would not make their factual claims false either. It would only mean you should verify them, rather than accept them on authority. Which brings us to the uncomfortable conclusion for everybody arguing this week. The partisanship question, whichever way it is answered, does not settle the substance. Only evidence does. And in the 10 days since that meeting, the public argument has been almost entirely about the messenger. Tell me one word in the comments. Should religious leaders criticize government, yes or no? Not whether you like Wike or the Cardinal, just the principle. One word. I read every one.
Who lined up where? The reaction has been broad, and it does not split neatly along the lines you might expect. The loudest response came from Rotimi Amaechi, Wike's predecessor as Rivers State Governor and now the vice presidential candidate of the African Democratic Congress. Speaking on Channels Television's Politics Today, he said he had suspended the traditional mourning of his late mother to appear because he considered it necessary to defend his faith. On the partisanship claim, he was categorical, saying, quote, "He supports nobody. I see Cardinal Onaiyekan regularly. I worship at his chapel. He has no political leaning. The Catholic Church has no political leaning." End quote. He said the only thing that pains the cardinal is the level of poverty and hardship in the country, and urged the government to respond to the substance rather than to the man. Amaechi also made a comparison that has drawn its own debate. He asked whether similar remarks would have been directed at a leading Islamic cleric, saying that if the Sultan had confronted the president, he would not have been insulted. That is his argument, and we report it as his, not as ours. Two organizations weighed in on the same side. The Northern Youth Council of Nigeria, in a statement signed by its national president, Isa Abubakar, described the cardinal as a respected moral voice reflecting widespread concerns over inflation, insecurity, and hardship, and urged public officials to address the issues rather than criticize those who raise them. The Middle Belt Forum condemned what it called attacks on the cardinal and urged the president to engage directly with citizens affected by insecurity and economic difficulty. The Catholic Laity Council of Nigeria said the intervention was meant to call the nation to conscience rather than embarrass the government, and urged both sides to sustain dialogue. Note something about that list. The Northern Youth Council is a northern organization. That matters because it complicates any attempt to read this as a regional or purely sectarian quarrel. On the other side, the presidency's position stands as set out earlier, and Wike's argument about balance and credibility has its own constituency, particularly among those who believe critics of this administration have given it no credit for anything at all.
So where does this leave Nigeria with a general election under a year away? Three things are worth watching, and none of them require speculation. First, whether the Catholic Bishops' Conference responds institutionally as a body rather than leaving individual clerics and lay groups to carry the argument. Second, whether the substance the bishops raised on hardship, insecurity, education, and electoral credibility returns to the center of the conversation or stays buried under the argument about who was entitled to speak. Third, whether this hardens into a durable alignment before 2027 or fades as news cycles do. What is already clear is that public trust is being tested in both directions. When a government spends more energy on a critic's credibility than on the criticism, some citizens read that as evasion. And when critics are seen to acknowledge nothing a government has done, others stop listening too. Both of those are real, and both damage the same thing, which is the possibility of an honest national conversation before an election. And that is the part that should concern all of us, whichever side you find yourself on. National unity in a country this diverse depends on institutions being able to disagree in public without it becoming a fight about faith. So far, mostly, it has not become that. Keeping it that way is a choice everybody involved is making day by day. What do you think? Was Wike justified in responding the way he did, or should religious leaders be free to criticize government policies without political pushback? Share your opinion respectfully in the comments below. If you're new to the Policy Pulse HQ, welcome. We follow the money, verify the facts, and hold power accountable. Subscribe now and join thousands of Nigerians who want more than headlines. Until next time, stay informed.